Time. It's a concept with potential as infinite as its scope. Whether you're stopping it, traveling through it, or just experiencing its unending march that waits for no one, time goes on. And so it has in the last 10 years since Steins Gate first aired. It has been extremely gratifying to see this anime maintain its renown for as long as it's existed, never fading from the public hall of fame, never shrinking in stature or falling into limbo. As a theme, time is easy to botch, easy to fumble with. The dance performed to keep plot holes from opening everywhere you look is almost never perfect, but when it is, it leads to my single favorite anime of all time. This is Anime in Retrospect, by someone who has seen an anime for people who have also seen that anime. But this time around, it's different. Approaching my all-time favorite is a scary task. I feel a powerful obligation to do right by it, and I can only hope I'll have accomplished that by the end of this. It has been a full decade, just about, since it first aired on Japanese TV, and if you look at the upload date for this video, you'll notice that it's no coincidence. Shikura Chiyomaru is a name that I just don't see thrown around nearly enough. That's the guy who made it, and he's a creative powerhouse. Far from being a simple one-hit wonder, Chiyomaru is an impressive composer and lyricist on top of his obvious writing merits. Everyone who worked on this masterpiece deserves praise, but I don't think this anime ever would have seen the level of acclaim that it now enjoys were it not for Chiyomaru's talent and high affinity for detail. When I first watched Steins Gate, I was in college studying science. Biological science, mind you, very little to do with the science that Steins Gate explores, but I love all science on principle. And Steins Gate handles every scientific subject it explores with the esteem and consideration befitting of those subjects, even where it decides to go only ankle deep. No effort is spared in respecting the boundary between real theoretical physics and time travel science and the world's own fictional mechanics that it needs to take liberties with in order to make a story like this tick. Anyway, this very personal affection for science as a field is why I was drawn to Steins Gate in the first place. Well, that and the unshakable reputation trailing behind it. But the aspect that, for the last decade, has cemented me as the returning, ecstatic, honestly kind of obsessed fan that I am, is something else. And that is that everything in Steins Gate means something. All of it. Steins Gate is filled to the brim with meaning in every detail. Little things that don't even matter, and a huge number of things that on the surface make it seem like Chiyomaru just wanted to cram in as much as he could in order to make it seem cooler. But it all adds up, and never in a way that feels like there's too much. Every little connection you can trace feels good. The never-ending naming conventions, the more tangible aspects, even the biggest and most important themes. Everything means something, and it all meets at a figurative confluence thanks to a grand design. I'm writing this video to focus chiefly on Steins Gate proper, but it will include a little bit of Steins Gate Zero as well where applicable. It's been about 3 years since the Steins Gate Zero anime arrived in high fashion. Some people love it, myself included, some people hate it, but regardless of how you feel, I think it's safe to say it's a story that deserved to be told. Anyway, Steins Gate is memorable, emotional, thrilling, proud, confident, and bold. Its themes, stories, characters, highs and lows, the time has come for me to look back on all of it. On the delusions given life to destroy the world. On the fascinating inner workings of that world, the characters who inhabit it, and the towering themes lurking in the shadows. And on the phoenix who keeps on rising to meet every last insurmountable part of it. This is my retrospective on Steins Gate. From the opening shot, which uses a mess of power lines to represent world lines, Steins Gate is already at it. Literally, with the first shot, there is already replay value. A now iconic monologue by Okabe ends where the power lines do, on the rooftop of his lab, a sudden but clean transition to reality. The harsh sunlight helps the scene feel like it's part of a dream or some otherwise questionable fantasy. Mayuri appears, and we learn the pair have somewhere to be. Their place to be, of course, is the Radio Kaikon building in Akihabara. We know what happens there. The mysterious crash on the roof, the UPA, Dr. Nakabachi's conference, Okabe interrupting that conference, Kurisu and the oddities surrounding her, the blood-curdling scream, and Kurisu's lifeless body. Time as a physical system seems to crash as Okabe sends a message relaying what he saw, and as he sees something else. The OP plays out and we find ourselves behind a monitor in a reality different from the one we just left behind. Okabe too questions reality and the day's events, but ultimately reorients himself by messing around with his friends. That is, until we see where it all leads. To a moment of unadulterated, eye-opening cognizance as we and Okabe realize that the day did go as he remembers it, and that Kurisu is still alive. For an anime that gets dragged for having a slow start, there sure is a lot that happens in just this first episode. I have to question whether or not the people who tout this poor criticism are even paying attention. I propose that Steins Gate is Slow is the worst and most offensive popular anime opinion out there. It's a wrong opinion, and I hate it. Just because it doesn't go into hyperdrive until later doesn't mean it's slow before then. I do acknowledge the small degree of truth to this criticism though. It takes a bit to get to the overall point at the end of episode 12, but everything before then ends up being as important as any future moments. Stop and smell the roses if it seems slow, or listen to Miyano Mamoru's amazing laugh. That laugh comes right after Kurisu soundly defeats Okabe in a time travel debate during episode 2. I'll make this my first visual novel comparison. In the anime, only Kurisu's side of the argument is ever represented. Any knowledge of Okabe's arguments can only be picked up via Kurisu, since Okabe doesn't speak during this scene. In the VN, however, it's a very different debate. Instead of the fun flash-forward, flashback, flash-forward directing the anime uses, the VN hosts a full-on debate that dives deep into all the real-life scientific time travel theories. The few different ways it could be possible, and that even if any of the theories are correct, how it still isn't possible with the resources humans have, now or ever. It goes in hard here, and it was the first part of the VN that reactivated my fascination for the scientific principles of time travel theory. That's not to say that the anime handles this in a more lackadaisical fashion. It's clearly a scenario where it was shortened due to time constraints, and much to the anime's credit, the main idea is still there, and it's still entertaining. Later in the episode, as Okabe and Mayuri are heading back to the lab, they find that their usual path is blocked by a sign that the police put up. Only it probably wasn't by the police. More likely, this is where one of CERN's first observable actions can be found. The path that Okabe and Mayuri would have taken leads to the rear of the lab, and underneath that lab is Mr. Brown, who we know works for CERN. Considering this is still the same day that the titular world line shift occurs, if you happen to be rewatching and are paying close enough attention, it definitely appears that the organization has already begun moving. Followed up by this almost imperceptibly short frame of the desert, which later appears in Okabe's dream and which we much later learn is also the place and time of Arclight for a different Okabe, and this scene becomes beyond impeccable. And beyond subtle at that. This frame runs for not even 0.25 seconds, so I was being literal when I described it as almost imperceptible. But it's a subtlety that I very much appreciate. Against the simple, minor key but still hopeful piano with the warm sunset as the backdrop, it's a reminder of how grounded in realism Steins Gate is in spite of it being a science fiction story. In a series remembered for its prodigious and awe-inspiring moments, the fact that a scene made to appear unremarkable can be one of my favorites in the show supplies me with an even greater fondness than I already had. Everything I just talked about is not even 8 minutes into episode 2. No one would know the real meaning of that frame until the very end of Steins Gate 0. This is an Eiichiro Oda One Piece tier Giga Brain move, and it is presented so listlessly that no one would normally be the wiser. New characters are introduced, all with striking personalities as the episode continues on. The beautiful and enchanting Luka Urushibara, the friendly and outgoing Suzuha Amane, Moeka, and the hyper-moe Ferris Nyan. The range of tones this episode pulls off is just outright impressive. especially since at the end, when Okabe and Daru's banana experiment results in what appears to be teleportation, we see a moment of intensity similar to the one at the end of the first episode. But this time, we get to see it play out long enough to let the goosebumps fully set in. Look, I'm not going over every episode as much as I would enjoy doing that. It doesn't take long for the anime to continue on and get into its more slice-of-life components, especially the comedic ones, an often overlooked component of what makes Steins Gate so good. From Christina, to Okabe and Daru ganging up to make her say perverted stuff, to... And even as the focus shifts to these more day-to-day interactions, the story makes sure not to forget the importance of the main plot. Okabe encountering John Titor on @channel and further realizing that the world isn't the one he knows, the continuing investigations into the big prior events, hacking into fucking CERN, it goes on. Tense new revelations continue to emerge, and that can paradoxically be while everyone's goofing off playing weird games and drinking Dr. Pepper, or during the goosebump-inducing moments we should be looking forward to by now. Amongst all the bonding the characters experience in this time, artful junctures of serious nature still appear. With each instance of a time snippet, we are reminded that, well, shit has already gone awry. Amongst all the silly fun, a monster looms overhead, awaiting the right moment to show itself and see that these lively moments are torn asunder. Getting into the heroines and their own unique routes, at least what the anime shows of them, is the section of the story that has grown on me the most. I don't mean to say that I didn't enjoy it initially, but I definitely wasn't thinking back to how great this section is after I finished the anime for the first time. The reason I now have a higher opinion of this part is because Steins Gate does a lot to build its characters here, such as when Okabe goes to Ferris's home. There, he learns that her real name is Rumiho Akiha, and she tells him that the reason she lives in such a lavish apartment with her own butler is because Akihabara was originally her family's land. She then explains that the reason she hides this and goes by Ferris Nyanyan is because when people see the Akiha name, they don't treat her like Ferris anymore, instead opting for a depressing attitude of formality. So when Okabe says he doesn't care about any of that and how her status is worthless to him, she actually blushes and says that forceful men excite her. It's a small thing, but this sort of disregard for her family's status is, in truth, exactly the kind of interaction she wishes she could have with people as Rumiho Akiha. It isn't just the alternative heroines like Ferris that see growth here. At the end of episode 9, after more D-mail experiments and trying to reclaim the IBN 5100, Okabe has a moment of pure clarity as Okabe rather than Hoin, where he realizes the significant danger posed by changing the past, thinking to himself that it's possible they've already done something that can't be undone. The mad scientist persona he fancies for himself begins to slip away as the seriousness of what they're all doing finally gets through his skull for real. He was not handling D-mails with the responsibility demanded of such a dangerous and exceptional power. It took him seeing it in front of his own eyes to respect it. It's one of my favorite Okabe moments. Because from this time on, he retains this admirable sense of responsibility for everything and everyone he becomes involved with. He cares about everyone more than he really owes them, but it just means he has a big heart. Even though the original world line doesn't involve Ferris's dad being alive or Lukako being female, Okabe can't help but think that the best of both worlds should be attainable. Of course that's ideal, but he knows deep down that he doesn't have the time or the mental endurance to keep watching Mayuri die and have to start from scratch with Kurisu for each and every time leap he decides to make. And that is with the added bonus of CERN's eventual dystopia looming over his subconscious. But his main goal is unabashedly to save Mayuri. The troubles of others in preventing CERN's takeover can come second. Not to mention, he understands that Kurisu would egg him on to stop chasing these seemingly utopia-esque scenarios and just do the logical thing by returning everything back to the beta world line. Kurisu is, after all, stubbornly logical at all times, which is needed for Okabe to pursue the right path and come up with the right plans, because he can really be a bonehead. As the time leaps pile up, he is wearing thin to the point where he is really Okabe instead of Hoin Kyoma, and each time he does decide to invoke Hoin Kyoma, it's a painful and forced attempt to boost his own morale. Little does he know that Steins Gate does exist at the end of the path. Both Mayuri and Kurisu are saved, but to reach Steins Gate, the other utopias have to exist as only possibilities. Helping Lukako, or Ferris, or anyone else ends with Mayuri or Kurisu dead. Okabe realizes this in the end, and doesn't have to feel regretful about sacrificing the memories of his friends and almost lovers. These arcs grew so much on me because they build up not just Okabe, but characters who seemed like they were just off to the side at first. We get to see their deepest recesses. We come to understand the intricacies about how time works in this universe. From the butterfly effect to the implications and limitations of reading Steiner, to the despair it can so naturally create. The despair in this story is great, in the only way that despair can be. For the audience, for us sky-clad observers. It starts when Okabe learns he is being watched. The sound effects and sinister OST creeping in to make me feel the same fear as Okabe. The slow realization that it isn't just him who is being stalked, it's everyone at the lab. A sudden cut to a wildly different but beautiful visual style, and Okabe is on his way to save Mayuri. He reaches the lab, opens the door, and... Well, yeah, I mean, this is Steins Gate after all. There's a little bit of everything where it's needed. All jokes aside, the despair in that moment is still very much real and every bit as serious as the music makes it sound. And of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Nothing compared to the horrifying suffering to follow. And then, it happens. The monster finally bares its fangs. Mayuri is killed. The sweet, lovable, innocent, Kana Hanazawa-voiced Angel is violently robbed of everything because she is deemed unnecessary. The organization is real, Moeka is the killer, and Suzuha knows something. Okabe's spiral begins as a slow crawl of increasingly desperate time leaps, leaving Kurisu behind after witnessing her frightening desperation and subsequent death. The total amount of these time leaps is somewhere in the 3-digit zone, but it's all a blur for Okabe. Hoin is nowhere to be found, but he's there, dormant. Rare but tangible progression helps to keep Okabe going. Learning about Suzuha and the time machine helps him to regain at least a little bit of his normal self. Until, of course, she fails her mission, reinstating Okabe's suffering. It's the single most tragic moment for me, coming right at a time when hope had been restored. It's followed up by Ferris's tragedy, then Lukako's, and then, well, Moeka's. The FB development shocked me the first time around, especially in the VN. The dragonfly analogy hits hard here. But the biggest impact of the whole story follows just after. The real shock. Okabe realizes that in order to save Mayuri, in order to get back to the other attractor field, Kurisu has to die. He finally seems to have a clear path to victory, and this cruel paradox comes out of the woodwork. So many wild things have taken place that it wasn't just our mad scientist who forgot the beginning. I was preoccupied with it all myself. Kurisu Makise is Okabe's only lifeline to sanity during this Promethean trial, the only comfort he is able to find while being trapped and relentlessly abused by fate. Just like I am relentlessly abused by fate, but in a very different way. Their budding romance, along with returning to a world where it can be allowed to thrive, has been threatened by another trial that dwarfs the first. They are both faced with this impossible choice, but they make it together as comrades and as lovers. Okabe is the one who agrees to her proposition. That's important to remember. When Hoin Kyoma makes his triumphant return, it's to save Kurisu. He spent many time loops being saved by her kind, caring temperament, by her intelligence, and by her feelings for him. So when he is the one to solve the final piece of the puzzle, swooping in to in turn save Kurisu, I don't do the whole shipping thing, but if I had to pick one, then it would be these two. The romance wasn't prominent in the story, it didn't have time to be. Seeing it worm its way into the fold while being so fulfilling surprised me. The subtle here and there style buildup of their romance is characterized throughout the entire story. Their adorable bonding moments are an ever-present factor, slowly leading up to the excellent payoff. I mean, Homeboy has good taste though. Who doesn't want themselves a nice neuroscientist genius GF to butt heads with all the time? What I love the most about Kurisu, outside of her selfless resolve, is how unique the acting behind her feels. Yeah, she's a tsundere, but what's unique is that voice. Asami Imai doesn't exactly have many other major roles as an actress. It's certainly rare to be able to recognize her outside of Steins Gate because of this, making it all the more special every time I revisit the anime. Suzuha is a favorite of mine too. She's cute, she's fun, I fucking love that. And as cheerful as she often is, Suzuha has had a dark existence. not recognizing what fresh corn looks like, referring to herself as a warrior and later striking a menacing pose upon meeting Kurisu, reacting to a helicopter with a duck and cover. All this stuff should be sounding the alarm bells even for a first-time viewer, but we don't really get to see the darkness she escapes outside of her explanation until well into Steins Gate 0. Meeting her father and acknowledging the lab members as her friends is one of the happiest moments in the story to me, second only to Okabe reaching the achievement point. And on her journey to find him, the viewer becomes involved in the search as well. I am mad scientist. It's so cool. Son of a bitch. Everyone knows this scene because it's funny, but I also remember it for reaching through the fourth wall. It's when Okabe goes to hand their new potential ally in the search his contact information in case the dude remembers why the pin looks familiar. Anyone else they've asked about it up until this point just shook their heads. But the guy recognizes it, even if he is unsure of why. And we have gotten enough close glimpses of it ourselves by now. We should be clued in by those initials. So the fisheye lens used during this scene, not much different from the one used when Okabe addresses us through the TV in episode 1, is a satisfyingly clever way of asking us to figure it out. Okabe holding it up in the most easy way for the viewer to see yet, right after him and Suzuha leave, just adds to the weight of that idea. This episode ends with the street vendor calling and saying he remembers about the pin, after the rest of the episode busies itself with making the identity of Suzuha's dad far too clear for us. It was right there all along. Even though this is an adaptation of Shikura Chiyomaru's more grand design, being able to take on such an immense work and condense it into 24 episodes, still packing a serious punch, proves the directing talents at work here. The anime sells the same mojo that makes the visual novel so great, and thanks to the directors, it doesn't struggle to. The voice cast helps out in that department too, of course. Kana Hanazawa as Mayuri, Tomokazu Seki as Neckbeard Gilgamesh, Asami Imai, Yukari Tamura, Mamoru Miyano, who I've met in real life by the way, and the rest all do their part in making their roles super memorable. And can we talk about the music really quick? Yes, Gate of Steiner is iconic. Skyclad Observer, Hacking to the Gate, or any other part of the OST are simply chef's kiss. And what about all that meaning stuff I was talking about at the beginning? Each reference about @Channel and other anime, including JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Fate, and other works in the Science Adventure series create meaningful aha moments that established anime likers and, well, certain website users will get. The kitty cat at the Akihabara Shrine is based on the actually real cat that lives at the actually real Akihabara Shrine. And the way that so many seemingly unimportant tidbits of dialogue are actually eminent foreshadowing, even directly referencing Steins Gate 0, is some Mensa Jimmy Neutron brain blast shit. Probably my favorite example of this is in the scene where Okabe and Kurisu obtain the IBN 5100 from Lukako's dad. When Okabe is set to leave with it, he tells Lukako not to forget the practice swings with the dark blade Samidare. That's just another one of Okabe's several Chunibyo delusions, of course, but cut to this scene in 0, where Lukako is absolutely dominating the enemy with his swordsmanship and it's poggers. Actually, all of Okabe's Chuni ideas have a hand in the show's future events, obscure and obvious. Of course, the much-referenced organization being CERN is the main one, but even the little things are fun for me. Like in episode 1, when Okabe receives the video D-mail from his future self, we see that the sender is SGEPK. That, of course, can only mean Steins Gate, El Sai Kongru. Obvious stuff, but satisfying nonetheless. Hoin Kyoma, other than meaning Phoenix and representing Okabe's determination through his many time leaps, is more importantly his vehicle that was born for and is dedicated to saving Mayuri. Or when he starts talking about the hidden power sealed inside him, and later on we find out about reading Steiner, his stupid hidden power that makes no sense. Reading Steiner is the only thing that does end up feeling like a contrived plot device to me. Well, not reading Steiner in and of itself. More accurately, it's Okabe's stupid childhood fever through which he obtains it. That, too, is obviously the choice of Steins Gate, seeing as no other explanation is ever offered. It could easily be some kind of symbolism that I refuse to acknowledge, like it being the mechanism that enables Hoin to revive as a phoenix, which, actually does sound likely, but that just doesn't satisfy me enough. Everything else receives an actually sufficient and usually scientific explanation, right down to the fatalism. In 0, right after the D-Rhine that erases Amadeus is sent, Okabe finds Maho at the lab. Obviously, this is strange and shocking for him. After all, it should only be because of Amadeus that the lab members were able to meet her. Or so we thought. Okabe realizes that the choice of Steins Gate is actually real, yet another Chunin element come to life. Many things are predetermined. Even without Amadeus, the lab members were always going to meet Maho. Back in the OG, Okabe mentions that Daru only joined the lab after finding out May Queen is the 3-minute walk away. But when he mentions this, it is in the world line where Ferris never brought Moe culture to Akihabara, including May Queen. Daru becoming lab member 003 was always going to happen. Even in the Steins Gate world line, Moeka becomes a lab member. Kurisu dies. Mayuri dies. Of course, which one of these is predetermined depends on which attractor field, but you get the point. This is one of the most prominent themes, yet somehow feels understated. It almost seems silly for fate or predestination to play such a large role in a story where a main focus is science, bona fide and fictional. Fate is a theme that... Fate is a theme that seems like it would counter all the cool science stuff, but we get both of those without it feeling conflicting. The whole fatalism theme somehow doesn't betray the spirit of the show. Okabe is, for all intents and purposes, the chosen one.
Right now, I feel more like the frozen one.
He has basically conquered and defeated a system that was designed by the universe through sheer passion and determination. So then, why does it not feel like Okabe is a deus ex machina? It's because we are there with him the entire time. This isn't the typical portrayal of a character with ex machina powers or someone who is fated to win. We see the story from his point of view almost exclusively. We know that he bent fate to his own will, and we watched him go through a nightmarish hell to do it. All this fatalism means something too. The entire reason that Okabe was able to win at the end of it all is because he fails. Every one of his failures, seemingly wasted effort at first, means something too. All of his vain and fruitless endeavors that unfold are how he is able to save Kurisu and open the path to Steins Gate. This Okabe obviously goes on to experience the events of Steins Gate 0 and through them comes to realize how he can save Kurisu with what is perhaps my favorite line of the whole show. The world can be deceived. Okabe dies in 2025, right? Well, no, not voraciously anyway. It doesn't have to be true that Okabe Rintaro dies in 2025 as long as the world perceives it that way. If he simply doesn't exist anymore, the world takes that the same way it would him actually dying. It's because of this that he comes up with the exact plan that will save Kurisu. Just as he deceived the world with his own death, he can deceive it concerning Kurisu's. Steins Gate 0 tells this overwhelming story in full detail. Of course it deserved to be told. Both stories are tied together inextricably. So, when all the years of foreshadowing and Okabe's dream converge in 18,000 BCE, as Kyoma gallantly appears to exchange himself for Mayuri and Suzuha, it's the most wickedly beautiful thing I've ever seen in anime. After all, by this point, we know from the first Steins Gate that the time machine can only fit 2 people inside. Milky Way Crossing is the epitome of sacrifice and tragedy, but with a knowing conviction that everything will be alright. That it's all for a greater purpose. And that's about where I'm going to end this retrospective. If I went over every little connection, not including the ones I failed to notice, well, I'd need to make a lot more videos about Steins Gate. And this does make me wonder, how much of all this meaning am I attaching on my own? I get pretty emotional during scenes where I don't think I'm supposed to, like this one in episode 12. It's a scene I find so unexpectedly beautiful every time I watch it. Is it my adoration for the scenario and how it's directed? For the acting? For the music? Or for the combined effort of all of that? I don't know what it is, but I love it. No amount of thinking about why is going to change the fact that I do. This silly scene of Okabe and Kurisu trying and failing to hide how they feel about one another probably isn't designed to make me cry, but it does that. And that's because of me, not because of some objective reason that can be analyzed. So yeah, even our own biases mean something here. And it goes to show that everything in Steins Gate has a meaning. Except one thing. Steins Gate.
特に意味はない。
特に意味はない。特に意味はない。そうだろう。
It doesn't really mean anything. Well, hopefully I did it. I won't know unless the world line changes. Thank you for listening to this point. Steins Gate is my favorite, so it means a great deal to me. If you liked it and want to see more anime retrospectives, be sure to like the video, sub, hit the bell, and any other things that I'm supposed to tell you during this part. If you're new to the channel, check out my other videos like my Oregairu retrospective, if you've watched Oregairu, of course. If you like Twitch streams, I'm a partner over there. You can find me streaming anime games like Fate Grand Order, so follow me there to catch the streams. I also have a new anime podcast with some fellow creators called Gomen Not Sorry. Hit me up on Twitter and join the Discord server too if you're so inclined. Links for all these in the description. Thanks for watching the video, sayonara, and L, Sai.
こんがり。
コングルーだ。
すみません。